Hi, Dorothea Hendricks here, your communication coach and presentation skills and the art of speaking. Last week, I gave tip number one out of my 21 tips. Today, we're going to look at tip number two. And tip number two is what you can do. How can you be more interesting? And I'm sure you already are really interesting and engaging. But if we were to raise the bar on ourselves, what can we do to be more interesting and engaging when giving a presentation or even a report around the boardroom table? Well, approach number one would be to find out some shocking statistics or fascinating facts. For example, did you know that most American children recognize the name McDonald's before they even learn to speak? Oh, that's an interesting tidbit, isn't it? So, and how could you use this? Well, if you're talking maybe about giving a presentation about how the brain remembers, you might toss it in there, or how children learn, or talk about brand power. Whatever it is that you want to talk about, the fact or statistic that you pick up must somehow support your key message and must be woven into the content throughout your presentation. It cannot stand in isolation. So it must match up and must have some bearing and tie into your message. Now, if you're giving a report around the boardroom table, bringing in a relevant statistic or fact, sometimes can jolt your listeners, bring them back into attention. Our attention spans are short. Generally speaking, they're so short. And as a speaker, whether you're giving a report or a long presentation, you need to find ways periodically to jolt people back to giving you their attention. Now, a second approach here is the hypothetical situation, the what if. Oh, what if you won $1 million or won the lottery? What if, or imagine winning the lottery. So this hypothetical situation, how could you use it? Well, if you're speaking on money matters or investments, and you are in the financial or the investment sector, this is a great way to let people know that if they give you their money, you are the best choice to give them the best return. Find a way again to link it in. The other thing of asking what if or the imagine, the hypothetical, is that it taps into the creative part of the brain. And what it does is it brings us also back to attention and helps us focus, kind of renews our focus. So the hypothetical, what if or imagine. Now, the third approach is stating a problem. Now, this is interesting because I often, when you're doing a presentation, there's a problem that needs to be solved, and you're going to provide the solution and why that solution works, and you're going through your presentation. It was interesting here. I was watching a YouTube video by Warren Buffett, and he was talking to students. And anyway, this is how he started out. I want to start by posing a problem to you. Then we'll talk for a few minutes before going into the Q&A. But right now, I'll pose the problem. Here is the problem. And then he went on to talk about he went on to mention the problem. Now, there are times as a speaker when a problem really needs to be clearly stated up front and not buried into your speech content. Because if it's buried in the speech content, it loses its significance. It loses the urgency of needing to solve it, because often problems do have a sense of urgency about them and they need to be solved. So put the problem that needs to be addressed, put it in context, and state it right up front. Now we've got approach number four is asking questions. Asking questions. I love this one. I do this a lot. And I'm going to say, when you ask questions, a key point here is let people know that you want them to answer the question, especially if you've used the hypothetical situation at one point earlier before asking for questions. And if you ask them to imagine or what if, they're still going to be thinking about that and they may not respond. So if you're going to ask questions, let your audience know that you want them to respond. And it's really, really important. And it adds so much to your credibility and how they view you, whether they like you or not, is when an audience member or people from the audience answer questions, that you acknowledge those questions and you weave their answers somehow into your presentation. So when they answer the question, whatever response they give, acknowledge it and weave it into your presentation. Don't suck up their time by asking a question and then not recognizing their responses or using what they've mentioned into your talk. Your credibility is going to drop a few notches anyway, right? If you're asking them to give their opinion and you're taking up their time, you better dang well use it, acknowledge it, and use it in your presentation. The last one that we've got here, approach number 5, is a prop or visual aid. Now, today we're talking on virtual platforms. I mean, maybe we use a whiteboard, or there are other things that people use that might be viewed as a prop or a visual aid. There are all kinds of things that we can do. They require serious thinking about, and they require practice in advance. There is one that stands out for me that I'll share with you, and I'm going to say, let's think of Simon Sinek. Now, if you don't know who Simon Sinek is, I'm going to say Google him. His last name is spelled S-I-N-E-K. Simon Sinek and his world-famous TEDx talk on how great leaders inspire action. How great leaders inspire action. You know what he does on that talk? If you go and watch it again, if you can't remember, he's using a flip chart with a magic marker and holding a microphone. Now, I mean, obviously he's well coordinated, so he can use a microphone and use a flip chart and a magic marker. But that's not the point. The point here is that he's got a prop that is as basic as can be, and he uses it really, really well. I'm sure he practiced many, many times, but he uses it really well, and it has an impact. So think about using something that can help you drive home your message and keep the attention and engage your audience. Now, whether we're presenting on a virtual platform or to real bodies, those people sitting in front of you that for a few years there we forgot about because we're all on virtual platforms. But, there are so many approaches we can use to make ourselves more interesting, more engaging, bring people on board. As I said earlier, attention spans are short. They kind of, after a few minutes, maybe 10 minutes, 12 minutes, dipping a bit. So jolt them back with a fascinating fact or a what if scenario or a problem or ask a question or have a prop in hand. Somehow get that engagement back to bring people on board and make you a better speaker, a more dynamic presenter. And why wouldn't you want to do that? Why wouldn't you want to be that? So this is tip number 2. Until next time, this is Dorothea Hendricks wishing you mountains, absolutely mountains of success. Tune in next week for tip number 3.